Good afternoon, people of Moreton. It's Max Hooper here, your Citizens Party candidate for the coming federal election in the seat of Moreton. I've started doing a couple of these videos. I'm going to continue doing them, and I've promised to you that I'll pick a good location, and I'm just showing you around the electorate of Morton's. Today I've just brought you to the edge of Toohey Forest. It's a place called Peg's Lookout, where you get this big expansive view of the southern part of the electorate of Moreton. So just down behind us we've got the Salisbury Munitions Precinct, industrial area. There's a history behind that. There's a grassy expanse in the middle there, which is the Archfield Aerodrome and Airfield. And right on the horizon you've got the mountains that open up to the scenic rim, and a lot of agricultural production that happens that's historical down there. So a bit of an interesting story about the Salisbury Munitions Precinct. They manufactured the weapons to support the Allied troop effort in Papua New Guinea in World War II. And the US Marines actually levelled this block of land. And when they did that, they brought out heavy equipment and machinery that the likes of we didn't see in Brisbane. Brisbane was basically a small town, like an agricultural town. And a couple of brothers by the name of the Teese brothers actually picked up the machines that the US Marines left behind and started a construction company. And that construction company, Teese, is actually one of the biggest Australian construction companies, centred in Brisbane. So a bit of history there. Yeah, today I've brought you here because early this morning, Australian time, for the second time in history, President Donald Trump was inaugurated as the new incoming president of the United States. This is going to have some big ramifications for the world. I'm going to make some comments on that at a global level and at a US level, but then I'm going to come down to what that means for Australia and how Australia should be responding. So the Trump movement, as a lot of us know, came from the MAGA movement, which was a populist right, nativist movement, political movement that has basically overtaken and swept over the Republican Party. And it's changed a lot of the politics, particularly in that post-World War II period, that Australia and the world and the US and its allies have taken for granted. It's overtaken the Republican Party. The Democrats have tried to respond to these populist movements by asserting more party control and control of its candidates, and that's failed. And what's happened is the American people now see them as a party that's protecting the establishment. We have this anti-establishment populist movement sweeping US, Britain to some extent, and Europe, and possibly Australia. So as I mentioned, the MAGA movement is a nativist right-wing populist movement that focuses on a lot of basically discontent with the political class. But I'd like to point out the history of populism, that populism is not necessarily a right-wing concept. There's a long and proud tradition of left-wing populism in the US. And a lot of those left-wing populist movements were very active in the times of the Gilded Era and the robber barons that were running the economy. And some of those times have echoes to what we're experiencing today. So my point is that just because the world seems to be taking an anti-establishment populist turn, that does not mean that we have a negative outlook. And in some ways there's positive aspects, there's a lot of negative aspects which I can touch on. But it's also a big opportunity for Australia to stand up and have a human-centred populist input into politics, and to remind the major parties about what's important to people and push for real change from the ground up. That is also possible. So on some of the positive aspects of Trump's populist movement is we're definitely seeing a lot of questioning of US foreign policy when it comes to regime change wars. We're going to see, I think it was Trump's campaign team that pushed very hard to bring Israel to the table, to bring the ceasefire in Gaza to a point. I think we're possibly going to see an end to the war in Ukraine, and there's going to be a lot of arguments on what terms that war is going to end. But it would be positive to see these conflicts end. On the negative side, we also are seeing a new oligarchical structure behind Trump, including like the tech barons and the billionaires like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and we've seen the changes in Zuckerberg, who controls Facebook. It's obvious that these people are going to be ingratiating themselves to Trump, and one of the weaknesses of Trump is his need to be liked. And I think there's a real danger we're going to see an oversized influence of billionaires into the US political machine. Another positive thing I'd say, another negative thing I'd say is I don't think Trump is not a warmonger, but I don't think he's ridded his party of the war hawks, particularly the China hawks. We've got to remember that Trump was one of the biggest China hawks, and he did a lot to transform America and China becoming more competitive, which is not good for the world. And there's some worrying signs that although we'll see some global conflicts end, it might see potential preparations for conflict in our own region, which are going to be a great problem for us. The other positive thing I'll say is that you've seen he's taken Democratic people into his caucus that's going to form his administration. RFK on the health issues, and also Tulsi Gabbard, who's been a big critic of America's regime change wars. So what are we going to see in a Trump world? So what we're seeing is the end of the neoliberal consensus and the globalist consensus that the opening up of economies and free trade is going to be much more subjected to tariffs. Basically, we're seeing a much more sovereign and nationalist turn in the US government, and we're seeing nationalist movements in Europe and the UK and a lot of the Western world. Basically, the people are fed up because there's been a decline in our industrial economies, and I think there's a backlash because when things are bad and the governments aren't looking after the basics and really taking care of the people don't want to have cultural and various issues shoved down their throat, and I think there's a bit of a backlash against that. So our party has never been a party that's engaged in the culture wars. We see it as a distraction. We see it that those are designed to divide us. In order to prosper, our country needs to be united, and we need to regain a sense of shared ownership and responsibility to drive positive political change.